All right, the panel is live now. And hello, friends. Welcome to the 2016 Global Dialogue on Waste. This is the fourth consecutive year for our Global Dialogue on Waste. And this year, we're bringing the best minds to explore the role of waste management in improving well-being. We will do that through four themes: oceans and plastic pollution, consumption and climate change, making a case for waste, and future waste management. And you can join our experts from around the world every week until September. Now, how do I explain what happened last week? So in the last 3 years, in all of our panels, we've had situations where some panelists got cut from the call and had to re-enter. But last week, I got cut from the call because for the first time, my laptop gave up, that too when we were live. That was embarrassing. But and there was no way to get the live stream back up, so we'll be rescheduling that call. And in the reschedule, we hope to get artists like AJ School and Alvaro Solar Alpha join us on that call. And we've taken measures to avoid something like that happening again, so do not have to worry from here on. And more good news, over the last 3 years, we brought more than 100 experts from around the world together, and the knowledge all of us created together is now considered as a resource. And I get comments from other experts that they're enjoying the panels, which is a great reassertion of what we're doing. And many of you helped us in this success by sharing information about us and by expressing your appreciation for us with others. And we thank you for that, and please do continue doing that. And coming to today's panel, Asher J will be moderating it, and she uses creativity as an artist to solve our generation's challenges like conservation and sustainable development. And Doug Woodring, who was supposed to join the call, is unable to do so because Google Hangouts does not work in China, where he currently is. And we hope to have him on future panels. But from here on, I'll let Asher take it. And Asher, welcome to the panel. Andrew and Florian, welcome to all of you. And Asher, come on.
It's a great morning, and it's a privilege to be here from the Pacific Coast. And I actually wanted to allow Andrew and Florian the opportunity to introduce themselves. So, Andrew, you can go up first.
Yeah, sure. So I'm the CEO of an organization called Plastics for Change. And our business model is using a deal process and mobile platform to build transparency and accountability into the supply chain, the recycling supply chain for plastic in developing countries. And then we work with brands to ensure that the waste picker person at the base of their supply chain was treated ethically and had fair market access.
And Florian?
Hello, everybody. Wonderful to be with you. My name is Florian. I'm the founder of the Do School. The Do School is an innovation and education platform. And what we do is we partner with great NGOs, foundations, companies, governments around really hard problems that they give us, and we build programs around them where we bring really diverse, amazing people together, young social entrepreneurs, experts in the field, sometimes students, and together those groups then actually solve those problems. So in a way, I'm not a waste management specialist. We're pretty concerned about all sorts of really hard problems. But since this is obviously such a prevalent and big concern for all of us today, we've been doing some amazing challenges in that context. And that's why I also look forward to listen to you guys and learn more about the other panelists and obviously also the questions.
Right. And I'm Asher J, a National Geographic explorer and creative conservationist. As introduced, I apply creativity to looking at difficult issues in our world that pertain to wilderness areas and sustainable development, particularly in lieu of marginalized communities that need access to education and to be empowered into the conversations that are otherwise held behind closed doors and which they are locked out of. So we're going to be looking at how innovation and solutions are applying in the world of plastics, because this is one problem that seems all-encompassing and overwhelming, and oftentimes we are not looking at the positive and what is being done, what can be done. So the first question I would ask Andrew and Florian is, in which aspect of managing plastics is the most innovation happening? Is it in materials science? Is it in designing the products, recycling, or in the treatment and disposal options? And I guess Andrew could go first.
Yeah, sure. I'll take a stab at it. That's a big answer. So I'll break it into two parts. I think that the areas that I'm most excited about are one in the policy realm, so the action that governments are taking, and secondly, the rise of social entrepreneurship and how more and more social entrepreneurs are emerging. At the same time that the flood of plastics is also emerging more than ever before, we're also seeing more entrepreneurs emerging. And I think it's such an incredible time to be alive, right? We're living in such a critical part of humanity's history where we've produced more plastic in the last 10 years than in all of the rest of the history of civilization combined. But I mean, it's also a time in history where the ability for startups and entrepreneurs to create an impact, we've never had these types of opportunities. 100 years ago, you would have had to have been an industrialist or a head of state, or 1,000 years ago, you would have had to have been an empire ruler or a king to make an impact on a global scale. But now you can, in today's day and age, you can launch a crowdfunding campaign, you can raise awareness, and you can use all these amazing resources, whether it's mobile technology, the internet, social media, to create change on a scale that we've never had before. So I'm really excited about all the entrepreneurial endeavors that are happening in the space. And then to get back to my first point, also on the policy side of things, and the action that municipalities are taking to create change. So I just got back from Bangalore, and if you go to a Starbucks or a McDonald's, Burger King, anything like that in Bangalore, you show up and there's a big sign saying we don't serve plastic anymore. So you can't. There's no plastic lids on the McDonald's cups, and that's just the start of a range of different policy mechanisms that can be implemented to really accelerate the recycling industry.
And you, Florian.
Thanks, Asher, and thanks for that, Andrew. Really interesting. I mean, I think to me, obviously, we see and we hear a lot about really great innovations in the field of materials, and I think all these approaches like cradle to cradle or looking at supply chain, looking at efficiency elements are probably sort of less sexy, but really, really important. But it nevertheless, at least from my lens, seems to me that the most potential for innovation is really around the topic of consumer behavior and how we can package products and services in a way that they simply become less heavy on the use of plastics, right? Because in the end, one of the problems, and I've totally sympathized with the element of how social entrepreneurs are really making a difference, and that's sort of our core effort to educate and empower social entrepreneurs, but it's very hard for them to create a solution at scale, and plastic is simply such a scale problem, right? And so I really think that the interesting innovation is to look at all the different ways we use plastics in the most mundane manners, and then see what kind of innovations around sort of the usage of those sort of convenience elements can actually be changed. So just to give you an example, because Andrew mentioned the sort of the coffee sort of industry. So we were given a challenge a few years back by the city government of New York, or the mayor's office. And they tasked us with the challenge of how to decrease the amount of single-use coffee cups being thrown out in New York City a day. So I think in 2014 it was around 8 million coffee cups a day in Manhattan that were thrown away. And so for them it's obviously a huge environmental problem, but it's also a huge cost issue because they needed to have a separate waste management stream. And so what the group of people that worked on that challenge did is they actually developed a cup sharing system where you would buy a reusable coffee cup, you would use it, you would drop it in containers at the subway or different sort of street corners. They would be collected, basically cleaned, and then could be reused. And the amount of people, or the percentage of people using reusable cups as a result, went up from 2% to 25%. So just imagine if you could actually sort of put a business case behind those kind of convenience solutions and roll them out in a way that sort of it would be better for the consumer, but at the same time it would avoid a whole lot of trash. So I think those are the elements where the real innovation and the real potential for scales lie.
Right. Yeah, you know, I actually recall reading a couple of papers a while back and trying to coin a plastics revision prize about how we can use food waste to produce plastics, like biodegradable plastics. So byproducts that exist irrespective, because we do consume chicken, for instance, and have chicken feathers, that could be a potential source that could be channeled into creating alternative plastics that are biodegradable. So to what extent are people actually producing these sorts of innovative alternative plastics that are biodegradable out of existing food products like food waste? And so can waste be converted into something that has potential that will not result in more waste and actually result in this cradle-to-cradle paradigm? Or is that not really feasible and not scalable? Because, as you said, you know, it is a scale issue. So if we come up with solutions, they need to be scaled. So how far can alternatives really be scaled to replace the mainstream counterparts?
Well, I mean, if I may quickly come in again, it seems to me that the answer is that there aren't enough really alternative materials yet. Otherwise, they would probably be used. Right. I mean, and because the question is obviously what's the threshold? So what's holding an alternative material back? Is it cost? Is it just that people are used to the current plastic usage, or what is it really? And I think there are, so obviously I'm not a material specialist, but we did a challenge for H&M, for example, where the question was how could they develop a more environmentally friendly retail store? And we developed hangers out of corn syrup instead of plastics that would work just the same. And I think so there's some really interesting solutions out there. The question is obviously what's holding them back right now, right? And in Germany, where I'm at the moment, sort of one of the biggest sort of supermarket sort of chains just 2 weeks ago would stop selling plastic bags, and they would just sell cycling paper bags. So why been done more? And so is it more a thinking, or is it not the materials there? I think that's a really good question.
I have a bit of a story I'd like to tell right around that point. I was really fortunate to have the opportunity to attend the Plasticity conference in Shanghai this year, and I had a conversation with a bioplastics producer, and we were talking about the example of Sun Chips several years ago. So Sun Chips is a chip brand, I think owned by PepsiCo, and they actually converted to a bioplastic bag. And the problem was that the bag was really crinkly, like I mean really crinkly, like wake your kids up at night crinkly. And they actually took it off the market because of this crinkle problem. They actually saw it was affecting their sales. And so since then, no one in the chip industry has wanted to go back to this biodegradable chip bag, even though they've now solved the crinkle problem. It was just the adhesive that they used. They just changed the adhesive, and it's no longer making this crinkling sound. So I mean, that's an example where the solutions are out there, and there's so many solutions, whether it's different forms of algae that can be grown at mass scale in the oceans that can be used for bioplastics, where it's not taking up the important land use and water use that you have on land. But I think it is something where it needs to be adopted by consumers, and it needs to be profitable for the decision maker within the corporations to have it really be introduced at scale.
One of the things I was looking at was also when we're looking at how ocean plastics are being addressed, and people are often sieving out the oceans to get these plastics, and then they're converting into bionic yarn or into garments and products. But those products denude again because it's made out of these plastics that were discarded to begin with. So by giving them a so-called second life, are we actually making an informed decision or are we resulting in the cradle to grave paradigm again, but in a worse way, because with every upcycling, so-called upcycling, there is no such thing as upcycling, is what I hear, because you downcycle every time. The plastic goes down a grade every time. So are we making the problem worse? And also with things like bionic yarn, and where we're producing garments out of these plastics, is resulting in more microplastics being, unleashed into the marine ecosystems every time we do our laundry cycles. So are we making the problems worse with some of the solutions, or are all solutions a step in the right direction? Like, how do you guys weigh in on that?
Sure. I'll start off by saying that I think the stat is that all the shoreline cleanups through the Ocean Conservancy are still just getting 1% of the plastic that actually is entering each year. So and I mean, this is a huge global effort with hundreds of people participating in countries around the world. But it still just draws attention to the fact that we really need to look at how we can develop the infrastructure in the communities that are having the highest leakage rates. And in my opinion, the solution, a big part of how you accelerate the development of the infrastructure, is by creating the demand for the resource, so in this case creating the markets for the plastic, and providing decentralized access to places where people can exchange it or have it enter into the recycling stream safely. So from that sense, I do believe that transitioning away from the use of virgin materials and choosing to source recycled materials does have a direct impact on helping to increase the infrastructure and prevent a lot of plastic from ending up in the places that we don't want it to end up.
Florian, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, and maybe just to build on that, I mean, I think that I would probably look at it the way to say that all these different approaches are really, I mean, if the negative side effects that also sometimes, until we haven't tried those elements at scale, we won't know really about, are sort of legitimate to sort of explore. The only thing that I sort of looking at sort of the people that we work with don't really believe in is sort of the value of upscaling waste into products that can be sort of more lifestyle consumer products. Right, I think that sort of to go down an alley where you think that that could be a bigger part of to a solution, I don't think that that's going to happen, because I think it's just incredibly hard for sort of the average consumer to be convinced to find any beauty in a lot of the upcycled products that are sort of created. So I think if we look in the area sort of lifestyle, retail products, then upcycling, I think, is not really the way to go, but not even for sort of the side effects, but simply for the point that I don't think it can be scaled.
And so the next part of the focus is to evolve this conversation to talk about how what is the pace and scale of the innovation that you're seeing in terms of finding alternatives and solutions to today's ocean plastic pollution problem. So when we're looking at upcycling, you're saying that that's not entirely a viable recourse for what is an alternate model to what is happening now. So do you guys believe in just source reduction, like blatantly informing consumers that we shouldn't be consuming type X, Y, and Z plastics? Or is it about, ensuring that coastal habitats don't consume plastics? What is the biggest impact we can have in reducing marine plastic pollution?
Well, I mean, I think the simple answer is simply to say that we need to get away from using plastics for products for which we don't need to use them. And I think there's a tremendous amount of plastics that are used for stuff that can be avoided. And I'm with Andrew, the question is, how do you get to that point? Is that something where actually I see some brands at least stepping away from sort of using plastics if other materials are sort of there, or is it just an issue where we say, well, actually policy needs to step in and just forbid the use of plastics if it can be avoided? But I really think on that point it's sort of transforming plastics into other materials that is the most important first step, because otherwise we keep producing and we keep producing more and more and more, because more people are sort of entering of what's called a global sort of low middle class, and they will start using all of this, right? We've spoken to people of indigenous communities that sort of 10 years into sort of a stronger engagement with sort of a labor market and more products, basically invited friends of us back and said, well, look at this, our whole village is now littered. We didn't have that before. Right? So with this idea of civilization came waste. And so I think it's really the avoidance of certain plastic products that is the first important step.
And so could you cite some examples before we move over to Andrew, just because you mentioned specifically there are products that can not use plastic, that can choose not to. What would those products be?
Well, I mean, plastic bags, for example, right? I mean, you know, I live between the US and Europe. I don't understand why I need to go into a supermarket in the US and I get 2 plastic bags every time I go there. And in Europe, it's totally okay that if I buy a bag, then it's out of recycled paper and it costs me X. And obviously, you can still make an argument that recycled paper isn't always that sort of easy and good for the environment either. But as far as I understand, it's still much better than a plastic bag that's cheaply produced. Yeah. So from plastic bags to plastic bottles to a certain way we package, right? I mean, food packaging, I think, is just, as you mentioned earlier, Asha, it's just such a crazy sort of element. And why does it work in India that people actually use reusables, and in the Western world we seem unable to do so, right? And that's where I think, again, sort of that the innovation around sort of how we present opportunities to the consumer is really what's needed.
Gotcha. So if I were to weigh in on your first point, I think it's really important to take a systems approach and look at the total impact that plastic can have, because plastics do have, compared to alternatives such as glass and paper in some sense, you know, there's a big savings from the CO2 emissions perspective. In many case studies, they're reducing CO2 because they're lighter. That being said, I do believe there's a role for bioplastics, especially replacing the use of multi-layer. So this is the laminates where it's, you know, one layer of aluminum and another adhesive. It's very, very hard to recycle. Only prototype recycling or downcycling, upcycling. So I think there's a role for bioplastics in eliminating multi-layer, and then also in foam packaging. So the polystyrene foam that is so often littered and very hard to create markets for to close the loop. There's alternatives with bioplastics. So I think targeting bioplastics in specific areas, but also not forgetting about the positive impact that plastic can have in other areas. The third component, I think, you know, we've touched on a little bit, but just is the awareness component and looking at awareness campaigns that can really scale. Because you're absolutely right, Florian, about the generational divide, and in a lot of developing and transitional countries, it's just one generation that's now had plastic. So the generation's parents didn't have plastic, and they've learned the behavior from their parents. As you go 2 generations, where now the kids are learning from a generation that has plastics, you're seeing different behavior, but it's still an enormous amount of work to do to change that behavior at a massive scale. And there's examples out there, but there needs to be more funding for that. The fourth kind of area that I think is a real low-hanging fruit for mitigating the plastic pollution in the ocean is just creating national level task force that have the jurisdiction and legal frameworks to actually go and identify all the rivers that are leading out of densely populated areas or coastal villages, and being able to put in the right infrastructure, whether it's a river boom or river discharge net or screen, to directly stop the leaking as a kind of emergency band-aid approach. But to really address the root cause, you have to look at providing access to total waste management services, and this means increasing collection levels in communities that sometimes don't even have the tax revenue for supporting clean drinking water. So it's really hard from a policy perspective to have the decision makers prioritize putting money into waste management compared to some of the other really high priority social services. But there certainly is a role in having more funding internationally and funding stacks coming from not only tax revenue but also industry and other development banks to really look at the coastal communities that don't have access to crucial waste management services, because it's still roughly half the global population that, according to the World Bank 2013 research, that doesn't have access to crucial waste management services. So that's really what we need to do to address the root cause.
So as a follow-up question, I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned bioplastics, oftentimes when people talk about biodegradable plastics and alternatives to traditional plastics, the point is that unless they are decomposed in specific soil types at a specific pH, at a specific temperature for a certain amount of time, they don't actually degrade. And if they end up in landfill, they still become a waste issue. So how far is the bioplastics revolution actually helping reduce the scale of the plastics problem? And how far do consumers need to be informed, or should there be a collection program where people acquire the bioplastics that are in circulation separately, so that that it's disposed of in the appropriate manner, so it doesn't add to the waste issue? What is the right way to go forward with bioplastics?
Right. So there's basically two categories of bioplastic: PLA and PHA. So polylactic acid, PLA, it takes a long time to break down compared to PHA, which I don't know the chemistry term for that specific type. But I think it's important to choose the latter, and important to get the right certification marks so that consumers can distinguish between the types of bioplastics that are going to have, say, a 20-year life in the ocean versus the stuff that can break down in a year. And I think it's all about finding the niches, finding which areas can have where the role of bioplastic makes sense, because it can be a huge impact on the existing recycling infrastructure if you're taking bioplastics and then they're entering into the pelletization or the granule facilities, and then that batch of plastic has to be downcycled because it's lower quality, because it's contaminated with the bioplastics. So then we're solving one problem but creating an even bigger problem. So I think the niche is looking at those two areas of plastics that currently aren't really recycled, the replacing the use of styrofoam and replacing the use of multi-layer packaging.
Super interesting. Thanks, Andrew. I mean, I think from my side, I can again sort of share how I look at it from sort of the startup perspective. So we, for example, we have somebody in the community who set up a really cool startup around bioplastics to develop a new kind of diaper that you can then actually use and compost, and you can compost it in a way that you can build plants with it, and that is supposed to bring it into a total cycle. But again, as you guys mentioned, as soon as it isn't sort of composted in that very specific way and kind and used with these sort of seeds to start to grow plants, then obviously sort of the difference to a regular diaper actually almost goes small. And from working with those kind of startups, what simply occurs to me is that bioplastics, it seems that often if there is a management system, in particular kind of area, that often is sort of inconsistent and not always then living up to different materials, be it of sort of more lighter use plastic or the bioplastics also need to be treated. And I mean, I can grade every stream like me, but if then in the end sort of a lot of it's put into landfill, in the end doesn't help me whether it's sort of is it new innovative material. The way it's being treated not help it to dissolve as quickly as it could. So again, I think I would therefore rather again look at sort of the avoidance or the transformation into different kinds of materials or usage, instead of saying, okay, afterwards, well, let's look at the material and let's just hope that we can sort of increase sort of the amount that will not end up in oceans, or that will simply sort of dissolve quicker.
So in lieu of the type 1 to type 7, of all the traditional plastics that exist, which is the most hazardous that needs to be replaced completely or banned completely and dealt with immediately?
That sounds like an Andrew question.
Yeah, so I mean the villain in the 1 to 7 is PVC because it's just harder to recycle. At certain temperatures, in certain contaminants, it can create chlorine gas, which, especially in the developing regions where it's, a lot of the time it's low-tech extrusion processes that are creating the granules, which are then used in the manufacturing process. There's not a really high quality control, pollution prevention mechanisms in place there. So when brands and product designers have the opportunity to replace PVC with, say, PET or other types of plastics, they should. I think it's also really important to look at the important just designing with the end in mind of this has to go back into the recycling process. And I think there needs to be more communication between the granule producers, the people that are actually processing the plastic to be used again in manufacturing, and the product designers who are designing these products and that may have absolutely no idea how the recycling industry operates and the needs of the recyclers. I mean, there's one example of a bottle company that I won't name, but they have one PET bottle, but in the top part of the bottle is a different grade of plastic. So the waste pickers, they can't even collect it because it's two different grades of plastic in the same bottle. So that's just a simple design change that could have a huge impact on getting all these plastics back into the loop.
So in terms of what a consumer can do, people always ask, what can I do to help? And I think that's a question that's not often answered often enough. Like, people just say, here are the big strategies, these are big solutions that are being innovated out there, but then what is something innovative that an individual can do in their life that would have immediate large-scale impact?
Well, I think it's, as always, that's sort of the hard collective action problem, right? Because it's, I think we could probably, I mean, amongst us, we would, I guess, even if we had a few school children in here, at least if you have sort of, I don't know, in certain countries specifically, you learn all about that in elementary school, about sort of how you separate your waste, how you should sort of take your shopping bag with you, how you should avoid sort of litter, how you should sort of not consume single-use beverages, and I don't know, sort of bring your own bottles and all that stuff. So I think there's a lot of stuff that we all know that we could do. And interestingly enough is obviously that many or almost all of us obviously don't do them, right? So I'm totally guilty as well that I go out, and if I need a bottle of water, then I buy a plastic bottle of water and I drop it at the next sort of litter box. And so I think the sort of the trick is there, probably not to say, okay, what could the individual do but isn't doing, as we see from the experience of sort of the last, let's say, 20 years, but let's simply see what could we offer the consumer so that the consumer would actually feel good about sort of behaving a different way whilst not having any higher inconvenience about how he or she is going about his or her life. I think that's the trick question.
All good points. I like to break the question down into kind of two sides. So there's the supply side, so looking at choosing different alternatives, bringing your reusable non-plastic alternatives. And then there's also the demand side. How do we create more of a pull factor? And that really comes down to breaking down the barriers to why the plastics don't enter back into the loop. And I think a big part of that is creating demand at the brand level for recycled plastic. So one of the main reasons, probably the biggest reason why they don't use it, is because with today's oil commodity price, the creation of virgin plastic is just incredibly cheap compared to recycled plastic. And with recycled plastic, you have to worry about the potential of a lower quality or contamination. and getting consistent supplies. So a lot of brands, it's just so easy for them to say, yeah, we'll just get the virgin stuff. It's going to work every time. We don't have to worry about this. And there's no transparency on which brands are using recycled plastic or not. So I think it's really important that there needs to be a way of rewarding the use of recycled plastic. And one of the things that has happened here in Indonesia is they've actually taxed importation of virgin PET for the use of beverage bottles. But that's something that globally, oil is already so heavily subsidized that it's now this externality that's making it hard to compete against the recycled alternative. So internationally, I'd love to see a tax on the use of virgin plastic to make it more competitive to use recycled plastic, and really ratchet that up so that the demand increases. And then the next time the commodity price of oil drops, the recycling infrastructure doesn't also collapse. So that's something that on the brand level side, and as an individual consumer, you can write to your local MP, or you can write to any decision maker and say, like, this is what I've learned on e-waste wise about the importance of choosing recycled plastic versus virgin plastic, and I'd like to see policies for this. And I think that just the classic going back to writing letters to the decision makers in your network does still have an impact. And then I think it's also important not to lose sight of the role of plastics in developing countries as a mechanism for addressing a lot of the social problems that exist in the communities, because there is this correlation of how the areas with the highest poverty levels also have the least infrastructure for waste management. So there's this big opportunity to use the plastic waste that's so abundant to create jobs, create livelihoods, and that's a part of the focus of Plastics for Change, as well as looking at breaking down the barriers for those at the base of the supply chain, providing them with access to markets to help create more dignified livelihoods at the base of the supply chain to accelerate the development of the infrastructure.
And finally, I wanted to ask you both if your conditions were all ideal, right? That you had the complete breadth, you had the financial aid that you needed. What is the one innovation that you would like to see realized in the coming years?
Well, you think, Andrew? I think I'll stick with my really simple consumer element one, because I think the problem with the problem of plastics and ocean pollution is, again, sort of that for many people in their daily lives it's just an abstract problem, and so there's the morality of it, but there isn't really sort of the how does it concern me on a sort of in my daily routines. And I really think that in the question of sort of how do we actually use materials needs to be brought home to everybody in a way. And so I think one of the most effective ways, it seems that we're all transforming the way we sort of have our work life so much that we keep eating out more and more. And so that means we need more and more containers to actually have that mobile food come to us, or we to it, or however you want to call it. And I think there's a huge potential for a transformation there, right? There's a huge potential for great sort of consumer-based social enterprises, regular enterprises that deal with how food comes to you, how it's healthy, in what kind of containers it comes, how the containers are treated. And I think if we get rid of all the stupid sort of food containers that are used all around, at least the Western civilizations, in the next few years or in the next 10 years, then I think that would be a huge element of a lot of people's daily lives and would get them thinking about other ways in which they could sort of transform the way they use materials and packaging. So that'd be, I think, I would bet on that.
I mean, I agree. I think the miracle breakthrough would be in consumer behavior. But I think that if you just look through history, it does take such a long time for behavior to change on a massive scale. We're getting there, and the next generation and the generation after that will be making a lot of progress. But I think what decision makers can do today, other than increasing an awareness through a variety of strategies, is actually look at the global sustainability development goals and the agreements that have come out of Paris, and actually use some of those benchmarks in policy to link to the use of recycled plastic and designing for recyclability. And I think that we need policy legislation that can have teeth and that can be ratcheted up so that you can actually link the use of recycled plastic to decreasing the CO2 emissions because you're not using virgin plastic, and creating this level playing field for brands who are doing things and making the ethical design decisions to be rewarded with a competitive advantage. So if I could wave a magic wand, I'd make that happen.
How about you, Florian?
Yeah, what I just said, I think the food containers, that's the way to go.
That would be your magic wand.
Yeah.
So in the past, I mean, with raising consumer awareness, since you guys both spoke about that, and you specifically, Florian, highlighted that, what is the most effective campaigns that have been done, or how do you get this collective action to take place? Or do you think it has to be through legislation? What are your conclusions there, and like to bring this whole thing together, to bring it to, end impact, so that we reduce the amount of plastic that's put out as a source every day in our lives? What do you think is the most effective way to get collective action on board?
Well, I think, I'd like to, if I could share this video, there's this amazing video by Dr. Noam Chomsky, and he goes through the history of social revolutions and how they formed, and how it does form, like, it's a series of conversations, and it's not a linear growth. As the conversations happen, they multiply. And he makes the analogy that it forms like a bubble. As the pattern of conversations multiply, it does reach this critical mass where the bubble pops and it becomes part of the fabric of society. The consumer behavior becomes part of the fabric of society. So I think that we're there, and it's on an exponential growth curve, but still a lot of doubling needed to reach that critical mass.
Florian?
I think it would be wonderful if Andrew was right. I'm a very political person, but I don't know, maybe I'm just not as highly optimistic about it. And my feeling is that there's so many really relevant problems that we're facing in our time. At the same time as sort of the attention span of people is going down, and even though we are making collective progress, I'm not sure that the progress is quick enough, and I'm not sure that consumer behavior is sort of changing quick enough. So I don't know whether there's any single campaign or sort of a campaign at all that will help us sort of make the transition that we need to make. So I still do think that there's a really high responsibility for policymakers to create the environment. Because if it takes us another 10 years to discuss yet whether in a single state or not we start abolishing plastic bags or not, if that's sort of the level of the progress, then I just don't think that that's going to be it. And secondly, I said, I think we need to sort of outsmart consumer behavior and not tackle consumers on their morals, but tackle them on their sort of the way they consume, and just offer them easier and more fun ways to consume. And that's where I think the innovators are asked, and that's, I think, we're also, whether you call it social enterprise or just good business, where there's a real market opportunity, because I think there's lots of people who are interested and who have the money and the wealth to invest in new approaches to sort of creating smart solutions. And that's why I think a lot of people who have the passion and who have the potential and the ideas should really go for them and see whether they can't create an opportunity for themselves and our globe in sort of coming up with really good and innovative solutions.
Thank you, Florian. Well, it was a real pleasure to join you both this morning in this dialogue, because I think I've learned a lot from both of you. And we would actually have to wrap up now. So thank you for being a part of this panel.
Sure. Thank you very much, Asher, Florian, and Andrew. Greatly appreciate your time. And we'll do everything that we can to disseminate this panel further. And hello, friends. Thanks for watching. And the next theme, consumption and climate change, will start next week. And we have a panel every week until the end of September. And don't forget to stay updated through either social media or newsletter or the website. And but the oceans and plastic pollution theme is not over yet. The panel on arts, communication, and behavior change will be rescheduled in July. Please share what you like, and if you have any comments, we're easily accessible on Twitter at bwastewise or email connect@wastewise.be. And thank you again to the moderator and the panelists. Have a good day, good evening, and good night wherever you're in the world.